So hello and welcome everybody to this month's virtual event. We are delighted to have you with us. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, because I know there's multiple time zones here on this event. My name is Claire Byrne and I'm the Senior Community Manager for RSA US. So on behalf of the global RSA community, including my colleagues Tony Shola, who is also a member of the RSA US team, and my colleague Kate Monkhouse, who works with the Welsh Fellowship community, and another colleague of mine, Nishan, who works with the Canadian Fellowship community. And our four speakers today. We're a truly global bunch. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us for this month's salon titled The Power of Rest. So before we get started, I wanted to cover a little bit of a background on the RSA and cover some ground rules of engagement, how we show up in this space, which could be a vulnerable space for a lot of people. And then we'll kick off our conversation. So if you're not familiar with the RSA, we were founded in the UK and we are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. Today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organisation, and we're committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced and regenerative, where everyone can fulfil their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas platform, and unique global network of about 31,000 changemakers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. Of the 31,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,100 live and work in the US, approximately 300 in Canada, which is one of our communities joining us today, and about 550, 600 in Wales, the Welsh Fellowship community. So the RSA US, we, myself and Tony and our team, we exist to coordinate fellowship activities in the United States with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. And my colleague Tony is going to be sharing some links and some information about the RSA in the chat and our various different communities that we have represented here today. So feel free to have a look at some of that as we're going. But before I turn things over to our speakers, Louise, Remy, Alice and Zandrea, I'd like to cover just a few bits and bobs and kind of ground rules for today's event. There's a ton of text here. Don't worry about trying to digest it all. You would have seen some of it when you were waiting in the Zoom waiting room before we started. But this is just to kind of reinforce how we show up in this space and just flag some kind of important bits and pieces for you all. So we really encourage folks to just use language that celebrates people's humanity, using I statements, sharing your pronouns if you're comfortable doing so, and knowing that sometimes our own humor or our own way of speaking might not always land very well with others. So just being very mindful of what language that we use and the tone that we use and making sure that we make this inclusive and a safe space for all who choose to participate. And we want to create voices for everybody, create space for all voices. Oh gosh, I have not had enough coffee this morning. Sorry. So sometimes, you know, if you're chatting a lot or if you've a ton of questions, maybe just taking a step back and giving somebody else the opportunity, maybe somebody who's a little bit quieter or a little bit shyer, and giving them the space to speak up and participate. Considering your impact, just being mindful of boundaries and time and feedback. And also lastly, just connecting with one another authentically. If you're comfortable putting your camera on and we can see your faces, you are more than welcome to do so. And also just, I suppose, pushing yourself maybe a little bit in this space, asking questions you may not normally want to. We really encourage participation and collaboration and feedback through this conversation. It is more of a conversation than anything else. And also, if something comes up for you during this event or something is triggering, when you talk about rest, a lot of other stuff can bubble up. So we do appreciate that. And we just encourage you to do what you need to do for yourself. Take time, take space, go off camera, grab a glass of water. My colleague Tony will share some resources that could be of help to you if you're feeling triggered. And just say to do what you need to do for yourself. I'm available on the chat to ask any questions. You can find me on RSA US events and you can DM me directly, or you can message my colleague Tony Shola and you can ask her any questions. No question is a silly question, and we welcome all feedback. So we've set aside about 90 minutes for this conversation, which sounds like a lot, but I know it's going to fly by and we've got a lot to say. But if we don't use the full 90 minutes, that is also totally fine. We've got a lot of great opportunities to engage with this conversation throughout. So enough about me, enough of me talking. I really want to pass the mic, as they say, over to our speakers. So we have Louise Adongo, Sheba Remy Kharbanda, Alice Catter, and Zandrea Steweart, who are very kindly sharing their time and their insights and their wisdom with us today. So I'm going to hand over to each of our speakers to introduce themselves, and also to just give a little bit of a background on themselves and their work. And I'll start with you there, Louise, if that's okay, if you can kick us off, and then we'll jump into a chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't know how to do noise cancellation. I'm on my computer and not on a Google Android phone. If you've seen the ads, apparently it's really good at it. So at the time that I was asked to do this, I was the executive director of Inspiring Communities, and I recently resigned from that position because I'm in kind of burnout recovery mode. So it's kind of ironic that I'm on a panel talking about rest. So you can probably read my bio or see more information about me on LinkedIn. My background and my foundation, I don't think is going to change, but in terms of what I'm going to be doing next, I'm not really sure because I'm just in this period of rest and recovery, but I'm very passionate about systems transformation and how we think about how we increase the pace of transitions. I think it's going to come up more as we talk. We're living in a very interesting time as humans, and what we do about that individually and what we do about that collectively is something that I'm really curious about, and probably why I came into a conversation around rest when I'm in the middle of my burnout recovery. Really looking forward to this conversation, and I'll pass it on to whoever's next. Thanks.
Thank you. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you. My name's Alice. I'm working within the field of workplace culture and creative community space. And over the past decade, I've mainly been focusing on increasing workplace connections, so helping people within organizations, within creative teams feel more connected, feel more inspired, which generally is my mission, like helping people live a more inspired and connected lives. I'm also the founder of Out of Office Network, which is a global space and community to reimagine how we work and live. And so just really helping people sort of rethink the way we set ourselves up in this modern life, and looking at like the social infrastructures and the tools that we need to live in this new era of work, as I like to call it. And also I've recently published a book which is called Reimagining the Nature of Work, which I will probably get to share a little bit more later on, which is a collective reimagining of our nature of work, to think about making work more regenerative, more nourishing, and it's inspiring rather than degenerative, which is very much like how our current culture of work is often set up. Yes, and I'm handing it over to the next speaker.
I'll pass to you, Remy, if that's okay.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see some of your faces. Before I go into who I am, I just want to give a big shout out to Claire, Tony, everyone else on the team who's pulled this together, the other speakers, and all of you who've dialed in whatever states you've dialed in, wherever you've dialed in from. These are really interesting times we're in. I am Remy. I am also part of the RSA US team. I wear very, very many hats. My background is multifaceted. I'm an oral historian, storyteller, practitioner of several metaphysical arts, a consulting practitioner of several metaphysical arts. My roots are in the land of five rivers, though I was born and raised in London, and now I am based in Brooklyn, New York. This is a topic that's very dear to my heart, not least because it's how I show up in my work with clients, but just also because it's how I've been able to root and ground myself as a displaced person in the world. Before we pass to the next person, just in the spirit of this season, in the spirit of what Louise shared also about being burned out and everything that's just going on in the world, I hope it's okay if I just take a moment just to light a candle for all of us.
Go for it.
I may or may not use this later in the meditation, depending on where folks are at. So I'm just offering this all to everyone before we pass to Zandrea.
Thank you so much, Remy. And over to you, Zandrea.
Thank you, and thank you for lighting that beautiful candle. I also have one by the side of me, so that's lovely. So I'm Zandrea Steweart, and I love the fact that at the beginning of our headshots, I've still got creator and dancer. It's been a long time since I've been a professional dancer, but in my day job, I am a systems lead, I'm a coach, and my background has been within tackling social justice, starting off as a social worker, predominantly within mental health, neurodiversity. A really big part of my life has been about tackling inequality. And as a person, I've had a really big connection with the natural world, and I've always adored being a part of the natural world. So for me now, my time, a little bit like everybody else has said, I am trying to weave together different concepts in order to try to create possibility for both tackling social and environmental justice together through systemic working and coaching, and also using creativity, hence the dancing and other means. So that's me. So I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me from Wales in the UK.
Thank you all so much. And it's really just great to get even just a flavor of your background, because I know you're all doing so many amazing pieces of work and have such varied experience. So in the spirit of my moderation role, I'm going to field some questions to y'all and take some time to reflect. If there's something that doesn't feel right for you to answer in the moment, feel free to pass to somebody else. Or if you want to build on someone else's answer, then that's also totally fine. But I'm going to start with yourself, Louise. Just for some kind of initial reflection. So how do you restore yourself personally and professionally? And then maybe following up from that, like what reflections, tools, and practices do you use in your life?
That is a really big question. Thanks. So I have really interested to hear what Alice has to say. The cycle of loving what you do, doing it well with passion, working really hard at it, and then crashing is not a new one to me. I've probably lived and worked that, and it's really supported by, as we've said, capitalism and the way in which we've worked. And particularly if you're good at it, and particularly if it strokes your ego, it's kind of like work and then be completely thoroughly exhausted and crash, and then figure out, find yourself again, gather yourself back is what I used to say. I have to gather my pieces, and then again and again. What's different, I think, this time is that we've all lived through some pretty seismic global things that have impacted us in our different intersectional identities differently. And so I feel like if you had asked me this question in 2019, my answer would have been very different and maybe much closer to like kind of mindfulness and what you see on Instagram and what all the social media says. And my answer right now is I genuinely don't know, because I'm finding my internal impact by the external things, those cycles are getting faster and are out of my control and are really not necessarily rated to work. Personal and social, cultural is invading my sense of how I thought I had organized the world around me and all I had studied and how everything was compartmentalized in order for me to do well. That's not really existing anymore. So I think, to answer your question, like one of the first things I've been doing is having compassion for myself and being willing to be honest, because it's really hard. And I just saw in that chart about the vulnerability. I didn't get to where I've gotten to in life by not kind of being this alpha personality, drive, go, kind of ignore parts of myself in order to keep going. And my ability to do that it doesn't exist anymore. And when I try to do it, it actually makes me sick. So I would say that's some of what is different, is having the compassion and really sitting with these feelings and finding community. So I probably still have the same friends I've always had, but the nature of our conversations around this is very different. Before, I would not be as open with them, that I'm like, I'm really tired and burnt out and I don't know how to do this thing that I'm doing. Are you feeling the same way? Or like, is it all broken? Does it feel like the world is, what is it? The planets are constantly in some sort of retrograde. I mean, I don't know. Every time I turn around, there is some retrograde going on. But then I think, so those are some of the reflective practices. I'm finding that I'm still journaling, still doing the personal work, but I'm doing way more in community. And I'm finding way more that the path to feeling better is through connecting with other people. I think I'm going to stop there because we're probably going to keep going, but I just wanted to share that the resting and the rest and recovery feels like it's very different in this space and time than it has ever been before. And that even the self-care is in connection to others, not just for the purposes of getting better enough to get back on the hamster wheel.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as you can see from the chat, a lot of what you're saying is really resonating with folks. So thank you for sharing so much, Louise. And I could see myself and Remy being like, yes, retrograde, the stars are not aligned. So on that note, I'll pass to you, Remy, to speak about maybe how you restore yourself personally, professionally, any tools and practices that you use in your life that really help with leaning into rest, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of how we talk about rest in this culture is a binary, right? There's the not rest and then there's the rest. And as I was thinking through the prompts and just thinking through this whole topic for the purposes of our conversation today, I was remembering my trajectory moving here to the US right after 9/11 and what all of that meant, and my work monitoring the fallout of the United States government's profiling of people and the various wars that followed from that, and how there's still pieces of me that are in that fight or flight response, right? My nervous system is still activated, and especially with what's happened in the last couple of months, it's happened again because certain communities are being targeted again. So rest for me is not kind of this like rest from, it's a resting in, if that makes sense. And it's a resting in my ancestry, it's a resting in what my family have bequeathed me and taught me in terms of not the Western sense of resilience. I have to be really careful, right, in the body that I'm in, using the language that I'm using, that a lot of times what I intend can be malappropriated or misunderstood. But resilience for us is something very different. It's not a getting back on the hamster wheel. It's a finding purpose, and it's a remembering why we showed up for this crazy circus that is our lives. And so for me, the practices are going back to my roots, sometimes very literally. You know, we've talked about this before, that a good reset for me is when I can go back to the subcontinent, which isn't always possible. But then I do it metaphorically, right? So I connect with the elements a lot. I connect with the elements in my space, for example. I'll take a moment to just literally be with the trees as a way to rest. I will prepare food in a very thoughtful way. I'll connect very directly with my ancestors. I have been a medium since I was a child. So when I'm really, really struggling, that's what I'll do. I'll sit and I'll ask for guidance. And when it's not too activating, because it's been quite activating, even as a lifelong meditator, I will just breathe. I'll just be with my breath and just wait for when I feel ready to do the next thing. One thing I've learned a lot from being in this country for as long as I have, and dealing with systems that, I mean, there's systems all over the world, but my particular experience of being with systems that really weren't created with our wellness and well-being in mind, is practice the art of saying no. That feels restful, right? So feeling into when if agreeing to do something or giving of my labor and time is going to feel like the opposite of resting in, then just learning to be okay with, I can't do this, or not a good time, and sitting with the sometimes the opposition that comes up with that. People are not culturally okay with certain groups saying no and pushing back. So that's been really interesting, and that's invited me to rest more in who I am, where I come from, what I've been taught, and what the natural world is for us. We're not separate to the natural world, right? We talk a lot about nature and us. We are nature as well. We have seasons, we have cycles. So that's a place I rest in an enormous amount.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Remy, and touching on so many different parts of, like you said, your heritage and how it's the, did you say resting in, on if that's the term you used? But also the power of saying no. 100%. There's a lot of people here who identify as women. I'm sure we can relate to that. And that brings me to you, Alice, because I know that we've spoken a lot about obviously work culture, life. I don't want to say balance, because that can lead to a whole other conversation. But I would love to get your perspective on how you restore yourself professionally, personally, and any practices that have been good for you through the years that you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Also, there's like so many themes I would love to touch on already. There's like so much to dive into. And also thank you, Louise, for sharing your experience. And there's definitely a lot of things that resonate with my personal experience, and also just like from the themes that I observed and then also implemented like into the booklet. I think for me, what I found is that it's almost like rest and regeneration kind of needs to be, or I try to really design my life and share my practices like in the way that it's rest and regeneration needs to be like a constant thing. And I've become very curious about like how we can actually design our work days and our work lives in a way that implement rest and regeneration as like part of the process. I've come up with this, like I called it a regenerative work-life canvas, which is basically kind of looking at different components that allow a regenerative loop, as it is in sort of the natural, in the regenerative design world, and also in the natural world, there's like a certain loop that we follow. And so the way I'm thinking about rest is actually creating a way of specifically like thinking about work as well, like creating a way of working that is actually aligned with my inner world, and finding metrics of success that are not following the conventional metrics, but actually follow more of what I personally really care about and the themes that I really see as being metrics of success. And that doesn't even just include work, it also includes friendships, relationships, love, side projects, pottery, whatever it is. So really creating a way of working and living that includes that. And then also, I've been really curious about different like models of work that actually also allow a space for rest and regeneration. Over the last couple of years, I interviewed like different people, from seasonal workers to people who work part-time, to collectives, to freelancers and full-time people with sabbaticals. So really looking at like what are also models for that allow these phases of our lives and seasons of our days that we have, and create more restful practices around that. And so it's really a lot about kind of like finding rest in the everyday life. And for me personally, that meant not necessarily following the rigid 9 to 5, but actually like designing my day in a very flexible way that I can, ideally, I just earlier today I took a nap in the afternoon, and that's also something like I need to practice. I think I also wrote this booklet basically like for myself, and everything I create is also just like for myself too, coming from that motivation. But it's a lot about that, and trying to find ways that are not just following a certain way of working and living that was defined and standardized by a few, mostly men in a very sort of, it comes from like the industrial age, and we're just like, as humans, as women, not really set up for that. And so trying to think about like how we can actually design different ways of working and living that allow for these like moments of rest and regeneration. And then also like Louise, something that you touched on as well, that's something I'm thinking about a lot as well, is like community and like support network, and how actually we can set ourselves up in a way, again, that like allows for rest and regeneration, which I think we also are going to touch a little bit more on later. So I don't want to talk too much about that. But yeah, that's kind of like the way I see rest and resting, or try to implement that in my personal life.
Thank you so much. And I know that myself and Louise had talked about communities of care, so I know we'll touch on that a little bit later, and how you can be vulnerable with your communities around you and asking for help and all of that involves. So we can unpack that later. But thanks for flagging, Alice. Over to yourself, Zandrea. And last but not least, I know it would be really great to get your perspective, and especially considering your background, like how do you restore yourself professionally, personally? Oh my gosh, professionally and personally. Oh, it's early in the morning for me, clearly. And also any practices that you draw from that help you with that.
Absolutely. And I can resonate to what everybody said, actually. And in particular, I have to say, Louise, I thought that was your approach right at the very beginning to say, that recognition of how we can be driven by our egos and how we can be driven by our sense of needing to prove ourselves and continue on that kind of nervous state to some degree, I think is a very brave thing to say, but very real. And I think going through the seasons of our time, I'm reflecting upon, the different stages of my career, for example, the different lives and the different kind of way I've presented myself in the world as a woman, and often as a woman within a space that is seen to be very hierarchical, particularly working within the public sector. Everybody there who really want to make a really good impact for the society of which they're serving, but still within the context of that, there is a big pressure to do things in a very, very certain way. And so certainly for myself, I have really tried to rebalance myself from being somebody who would get up at 5:30 to catch the train to get to London, to take 40-minute tube ride, to then start my day, regardless of the fact that I loved the work. And there is the tension, because you really think you're having an impact to do really important work, but actually ultimately it can burn you out. And for me, that balance of tension is something that is really hard to almost, I'm going to say it, forgive yourself for wanting to come back in order to be able to support yourself and show up in the world, still having an impact that you really believe that you need to have in the world, something that I've been driven by. So how do I turn up now? I have, over the years, I've realised upon reflection of this, dismantled a lot of the career that I had, to a point where I now have lots of amazing different parts of myself placed in different areas of work that I contribute to. So that might be, working in the public sector and supporting leaders to think more compassionately about how they lead and how they then show up for the workforce by modelling behaviour that is much more of a recognition of rejoicing rather than burning out, those sorts of elements, while still ultimately having an impact for social justice. And similar now around, and I didn't mention earlier, doing the Shiranuku training and being a coach, how I can weave those things together, almost like some sort of kind of tapestry of different components, where I can show up being authentic, but actually sometimes quite uncertain of, am I being authentic in that space? Because I can wear this coat feeling, right, I've got to be a particular way in a different space. So for me, what's really important to be rested, sometimes, I'd like to say that we all have good night's sleep, but there will be times sometimes I'll wake up going, oh my goodness, what haven't I done? And so actually being rested, even waking up, doesn't necessarily feel very restful. And so what I do, most importantly for me to feel grounded and present, is that I start my day thinking about myself purposefully. I wake up and I'm still. So I get my cup of tea and I sit there and I'm still. I give myself a moment for my brain to settle and my body and my sense of self to align, to get fresh air, to connect to nature, just to have and stretch my body, just to have some time for me, first off, in quiet, before reacting and jumping into the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important to take that into the workspace too, So part for me would be screens. I love this. I think it's a double-edged sword. I love the fact we're all here together. It's sort of 5:30 now in the evening for me, and it's morning for you, and that's beautiful. But also too much screens doesn't do my eyes any favors whatsoever. And so again, there comes that kind of sense of actually it's okay to turn it off sometimes. You're choosing what you're participating in. And as I think about myself and other people, I say create space around you if you can't actually get it, and just closing down on oneself and imagining that space and pausing, even if that's the only thing you can do in that moment, can sometimes be beneficial. So that's what I do. At the end of the day, I'm outside. So as much outside space as I can do to balance this life of on screen is how I recuperate and revitalize myself.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. It's something I've tried to do in the past, of like not looking at your screen first thing in the morning, of how to like settle into your day, but it's so hard. So hard. So I appreciate you flagging that, of like how tech or all things digital can influence the cycles of rest in our day, or just restfulness, I guess. So much just in these initial reflections. But one thing we didn't touch on in this particular part of the event was, what local traditions or traditions from your own heritage do you incorporate in your restful practices? And Remy, I know that you touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to offer space for anybody who wants to build on that, or who wants to share more about any local traditions or traditions of heritage that that help you rest more, or that enable you to rest, or anything that you think would be worth sharing with our participants today. And also totally fine if there's nothing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would like to share. So gathering my thoughts and I'm thinking about who's going to watch this recording. So when I was at Inspiring Communities, as I was experiencing what I was experiencing in my body and in my context and noticing, I would hear from my team members, but I would also wonder, gee, how are they being impacted? And so we would implement like a day off after a holiday, or we would say this week we're all going to rest. We would, and especially, when I like talk to the leader, because then the leader impacts the team. But what I noticed in that context, which I want to bring into the space, is how hard is it? And I'm glad that we're talking about kindness and compassion, because even when space is made to rest, our social conditioning is so much more powerful in the opposite direction of that people felt guilty for canceling appointments in that week, even though you have the best possible reason to cancel them, to say, can we please postpone this, because in fact we are all resting this week, because in fact our ability to do our work well will be better by our rest and our refresh. And I was thinking about that in the context of when we talk about rest and seasons and wintering. Claire, you and I talked a bit about that, of how much, and it's systemic. There's definitely people who are allowed to rest more than others. There are people there's a reason rest is resistance is a slogan. And for our humanity, finding ways and spaces and contexts of rest is so crucial and critical that I guess I'm just raising that, in addition to kind of local traditions. As humans, how have we separated ourselves from nature? Because even nature rests, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that regardless of income, workplace context, etc., our not resting is dehumanizing us, is just something that I wanted to say. And so I'm curious how we socialize this idea of rest, that it's not, hashtag soft life and hashtag self-care. It actually brings us back more into our humanity and part of the natural world, to understand that there is sowing and reaping and fallow. It's just something that I just...
No, 100%. And I know that, I think I've said this to all of you, that, this event, or even talking about rest, is not just lashing on a face mask and call it self-care and we're good. Like, we want to dig much deeper into the influences of systems, of capitalism, of our rhythms and natures of working, and how rest is affected by that. So I'm interested to hear if there's anyone has any reflections on what Louise said. Like, Remy, is there anything you want to tease out from that or add to that, or Alice or Zandrea, before we kind of move to some more questions?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to build on one thing. I think one thing that is very important to me, and also that I experience, is like for myself, of like what rest actually means. And there's a lot of research around like well-being and what different components well-being actually has. And it's not just, rest is not just about pure sitting on the couch and doing nothing. It actually can also be very much like active rest. To me personally, and to my work, inspiration is actually a really big component of rest. And I think a lot of us burn out because we don't feel inspired, because we just constantly are in this like same grind and just the same daily routine. And if we look at well-being, someone in the chat also just mentioned like the 7 types of rest. And also with well-being, there's like inspirational well-being, there's social well-being, there's just like all these, there's like 7 or 8, depending on which model you look at, different components of well-being, and we need to include all of these. And so I think that's just also something for me, even with small practices, even if we look at the workplace, I'd encourage even everyone to like think about something that they can do on a daily life with themselves or their teams to break out and get this like moment of inspiration as well. Whether that's like something I love doing is like field trips and doing, for instance, I try to not like do any client work on a Friday. And so on a Friday, I would actually choose a place where I can go that really nourishes me and makes me feel inspired. I recently relocated to London, so I'm going to like the Welcome collection or going to a museum, or it could be like something simple as having a puzzle table in your office to kind of nourish yourself with like new ideas and having a little bit of social time, but also inspirational time. So I think, yeah, just highlighting that rest also has like so many different facets to look at and can be taking a lot of different forms.
Yeah, definitely. And I saw that there was a lot of stuff popping off in the chat there around that. So thanks for that provocation. I see that Margie, you have your hand raised very politely. Thank you for being so patient. If you would like to come off mute or and share your question for our panel, that'd be great.
No, I'm good. I'm good. I was just kind of resting.
Oh, okay.
Just resting, sorry, and listening. So
I love it. I saw the hand up and I was like, is that a
no,
question or is that a high
no,
five? I wasn't sure. Okay, all good.
I'm listening. So
Well, thank you so much.
I just worked, so I'm on a split shift, so I'm kind of a little tired. So,
Well,
yeah,
this is the perfect place for that, hopefully.
I might post.
Well, we'll move on to some kind of like dig a little bit deeper. And I know that we are.
Can I come in?
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Zandrea. Yeah, gosh.
It's okay. It's okay. I just wanted to build on the inspiration bit because I think that's so important, and the sense of kind of knowing and purpose, something that really comes from deep within. I didn't mention that my I've developed something, funnily enough, called Inspired Purpose, and part of that is actually about the opportunity to be still. I mentioned about being still before, and there is something really about being able to connect just either within the space that you're in or within yourself, that can create that kind of inspiration. And I completely agree with Alice that restful state, it may actually cause a degree of excitement, but with that excitement brings some real possibility and some energy behind you, which is just absolutely fabulous. But you asked the question around heritage, and within Wales and other traditions as well, there's a term, and now I've got to pronounce it right, Owen. Now, Owen within Welsh translation is about flowing inspiration. It's a term around inspiration and about the creativity that brings. And in its real context, that aligns to poetry, it aligns to nature, it aligns to connection and being able to find your way forward, find a means to act and be creative through the inspiration. It isn't so much about thinking about what you're going to do, it's about feeling what you're going to do and being inspired by what brings. So, and with regards to utilizing, I don't necessarily say I practice that every day, but when I really read about it and I realized that its means and purpose and its translation, it just felt very connected and very aligned to what we were talking about in its real terms. So I just wanted to bring that in as well, because whilst I'm not Welsh, my heritage is, my family is, I feel that it's something I just wanted to bring to the table today.
Thank you so much, Zandrea, and apologies for not offering you
It's
space to
okay.
reflect. I appreciate that. I think in the next kind of couple of questions that we talked about really digging into, I feel like we've covered some of the kind of cycles of creativity and cycles of rest a little bit, but we can dig into that a bit more. But what I'm curious to hear from you all about is what to do when folks in your circle or in your work or your community are dismissive of rest and advocate for grind or hustle culture, which we're like saturated with at the moment, you know, and we're talking about burnout so much. So what approaches do you take? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you advocate for rest? How do you advocate for that kind of the cycles of and flow, like you touched on, Zandrea, in your work? And I'm going to start with you, Louise, because I know we recently talked about this as well. If you're comfortable kicking us off, what to do when folks are dismissive of rest?
Yeah, so I, in the true spirit of this is a good space, I find that people are much more understanding of the need for and accommodating for wanting to rest. The barrier is not knowing how to rest, because we've only, at least I've only started hearing us talk about our lineages of rest. When you're hanging out with people that you care about, that's you're bonding, and when you're connecting outside of your head, I'm also missing words, Claire, how that connection is supporting your rejuvenation. And so that is a version of rest, affording to rest, less so. Yeah, I find that the resistance to rest is not necessarily coming from the people who understand that rest is needed. It's more this larger system and the hierarchy and those who want everyone to stop remote working and to just work harder and in fact get another job and a third job, versus let's give people living wages so they don't need jobs. And I can speak personally in vulnerability that was some of what was hard about really coming to a place of, I really just need, I agree with everything you're saying, Alice. And then I got to the point where it now became critical to really take time off, not to have pressure cooker release moments. And then you're sitting with, but how am I going to afford it? Because if you're not independently wealthy or don't come with a trust fund, resting actually costs you money. So that's, yeah, I don't want to I feel like that's going to send us down a road, but I wanted to say that sometimes the resistance is coming from, but how am I going to actually afford to rest?
Yeah.
Another thing that I would say is, so when I was first talking about resting, people kept saying, well, how are you going to rest? And what's your timetable? And what are you going to put on your Excel sheet? So this kind of this like programming of what the rest is and what needs to be done when and where, which then inevitably turns on, so when is it over? So I just wanted to say those two things, and I see people are nodding, so I'll pass it along. But I just wanted to say that it is more the resistance of how do I do it, and how can I afford it, and how can I afford to rest for as long as I need to, versus your rest being impacted by your anxiety around needing to, what is happening and when I come out of it.
And I think that's a really important shifting mentality, because I know I've fallen into that trap of like, well, how are you going to use your time off, or what are you going to do? And then it's just like perpetuating this cycle of the productivity and needing to do something, you know, or how will I use this time wisely, dare I say it. But Remy, I saw you nodding, so I'm going to pass to you to see if you have anything to add on that in terms of yeah, what to do when folks are dismissive of rest or really advocating for hustle kind of grind culture, and that's not jiving with you, like how to push back on those systems or those kind of communities and responses.
Yeah, just building on what Louise said and what others have said, we are operating in systems that actively do not respect nature, which means they do not respect that we are part of nature, which means we are socialized to not respect our own rhythms. And so going back to what I said when I introed myself, for me, the way I push back is rooting even more in what I stand for, rooting more in the practices that I believe in, that I know are sustainable, and tangling and wrangling with that no. I do not get pushback from people in my community, or even just generally people who share same class level as me. It's more in the economic systems, right? And I've had to make a lot of very, very, very difficult choices, a lot of spaces I'm not welcome in because of my belief structures or my value system, a lot of spaces I'll never be invited to. I've had to, that no has operated in many ways, right? There's been the no that I exercise, and then the no I receive in response because I do not want to participate, because I cannot participate. So how I deal and push back is honoring that limits in the world are very natural and towing that line. Is it hard? Yeah, it's, excuse my language, it's hard as F. I literally pay for it. I do not receive the remuneration I deserve. But the flip side is I cannot, especially after all these years living in this country, there are some things I cannot compromise on, and those are my values. So that's how I deal with it. But just echoing what Louise said, I don't get pushback from other people. It's the systems. And it's the upholders and the gatekeepers of those systems.
Yeah, 100%.
We're really, really bought into, you know, these horribly extractive economies that we're functioning in.
And I know that we talked about as a team as well, like the urgency culture, which kind of feeds into some of this that we talked about before. So thanks for flagging that. Alice and Zandrea, are there any reflections you'd like to add to that? If not, that's totally fine. Okay. Perfect. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into rest, community, and nature. And I am skipping over a couple of questions because we all have so much to say, which is a good thing. And there's a lot of stuff coming through in the chat, so I want to give space to our attendees to ask their questions. But I think I'll kind of go from the kind of bottom up here in terms of how I'd structure some of these questions based on your own areas of work and based on your own experiences and some of the things we talked about in advance of this event, how we can really dig a bit deeper into this topic. So Zandrea, I know that we chatted a little bit about your work as a Shinrin-yoku practitioner and your own background as a social worker. So is there anything that you can share in terms of how we can lean into seasonal changes and incorporate these shifts into our either creative practice or our social impact work or our work more broadly? Anything that you'd like to share with those of us who are with us today?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I am off mute. I mean, it's so large. It is such a large topic area. And when I think about seasonal practices in particular, I think about the seasons of ourselves and the transitions that we all make within our lives, from being a child through to growing up to being in their 50s as I am now. My lens of life has certainly significantly changed, and there is something about honouring where we are at a particular circle, a particular time in our lives, and our opportunity to reflect that back, particularly in the fact that we are, as Remy has said, as we've all referred to, we are nature itself. And we can utilise some of those reflections, our personal reflections of our lives, and the reflections of how we connect with nature within our work. And to some degree, it's relatively straightforward. We we sow our seeds, we nurture, we hopefully reap the rewards, and we recognize that there is a cycle. Nothing is permanent. And therefore, as we utilize the seasons as a framework for some degree, it can at times help people to connect back within the impermanence of things. I think part of our ego states and part of our desire to succeed or to climb the ladders or whatever that might be is because we think we're heading towards something. The reality is we're not. We're really just heading towards more stuff and more status. And at some point, status we can burn out from and stuff we can get bored of. But ultimately, what we don't really get bored of is our sense of knowing and our sense of selves, our true selves, and our connection with our environment, whether or not that be the nature itself or indeed the nature of other community, as referred to earlier by Louise. It's very, very important. So for me, as why I practice as a Shiranuku practitioner was to interweave that with some of the coaching work that I do, in particular with leaders, and try to get people to think about things in a much more holistic, broader sense. In all honesty, I work with leaders within systems to help them feel a little bit uncomfortable, to actually feel a bit more uncomfortable about being more honest with themselves, to be more compassionate, and to recognise themselves as people rather than a figure that's trying to do the pushing. So with regards to the seasons, connecting those people back into nature and the seasons of themselves and the seasons of their teams and their organisations sometimes can be really useful.
Yeah.
And so I do that within the coaching, whether or not with groups or with individuals, try to expand their minds to think a little bit more differently and to recognise the different frameworks that we can use. So yes, we can use the seasons of nature, the turning of the seasons, but we could also use the moon cycles, or we could also use the equinox, or the, you know, we're coming into solstice season again. So those are quite magical things, and I guess it's how we start to provide a degree of safety for people who don't really feel that comfortable in some of those places, to help them almost navigate into these frameworks of their familiarity. But we're kind of pushing that envelope a little bit more. We're trying to push them into much more of a conscious way of living and being and leading. So quite a long answer. Many things.
All good.
Apologies.
There's a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So yes, as a Shiranuku practitioner, I use that to link into the other stuff, and then also for people in themselves who may be feeling a bit burnt out, to remember that actually connecting with trees are really good for us. There is that reciprocity, and they fill our hearts, they calm us, they support our blood pressure, they help us with oxytocin. You know, there are so many reasons to value and to give back to nature in all of its forms. But equally, that means it has to be reciprocal. And I think that that's something that we can learn, and we should be teaching young people today about our relationship with nature as nature.
Thank you
I'm
so
going
much.
to pause there and let many more people come in.
Thank you so much. No, that's great. And there is a lot to unpack with kind of tapping into the seasons a bit more, or how that kind of shows up. I know I'm a big fan of the winter and summer solstice recognitions myself, and it's always a very magical time. So thanks for flagging that. I kind of wanted to, I think some of this might come up a little bit more organically, but I wanted to give everybody space to just reflect on a couple of more maybe personal questions relating to their work and kind of conversations that we've had in the lead up to this event. So Alice, if it's okay with you, I was going to ask you a question about how you could, or if you could speak about how regenerative design, we talked about regeneration and rest and the interconnectedness of that. So how that shows up for you, how you incorporate this into your work life and your work life and rest. And you talked a little bit about almost scheduling your day, but is there anything else that you'd like to share with our attendees today that would be helpful, or reflections or tools that would be worth sharing?
Yeah, sure. I touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but yeah, I think for me, I've really been trying to practice the sort of learnings that I've been doing or observing over the last years, and I think especially when it comes to regenerative design, it's really about thinking about it in a way that is feeling, so regenerative for me really means like revitalizing and like nourishing, rather than actually draining and degenerative, so like extracting. And so it's really thinking about work and life as like this cycle that nourishes. So it's not just basically like sustainable, but it's actually a level on top of that, like really regenerating. And so I think for me, I'm currently, so as I mentioned, there's this like 4 components of like how I feel work can be regenerative. And so it's around identifying like your inner world and redefining your metrics of success. The second one being like models of work and looking at like how we work and when we work and how we can actually like set ourselves up to make space for rest and regeneration. The third being like rituals and practices to actually implement little things in our day-to-day, where it's about like feeling more inspired and feeling trusted, feeling like we belong to a group, feeling like we can actually take care of ourselves and how we engage and talk to each other. And the fourth being like community and collectives as a form of rest and regeneration. And I think for me right now, personally, the topic of like support and community is very top of mind. I think especially being self-employed and running my own business, it's very often feeling like there's a lot sort of on my plate and like on me to figure out. And so I'm personally thinking a lot about like what a community and support network can actually look like. And what was really interesting to me in my research is that just like from a work sort of setup, I've learned most probably from like collectives. I found collectives to be like really interesting in the sense that there's also this really beautiful quote from a field guide to climate change, which is about like rest and regenerate, or rest being like we are only able to really take rest if we're having a collective that holds us and like makes us feel that there's others doing the work, so we can take rest as well. And I think that's really important and something that our society and in our current culture is kind of very neglected, because we're so individualistic and we always think like we need to do everything and we need to push the fight and like push things further and make sure that everyone, also even when it comes to like resistance and to being an advocate or an activist for something. And I think that is just something that I personally think about, like how can I even set myself up in a form of like having a support network where I don't feel I have to do all the things myself all the time. And so, but it's really hard because I think we also have just been taught to not ask for help, and we're taught to like, you need to figure it all out by yourself. And so that's something that I'm really trying to unlearn and I'm discussing with like friends and my community a lot. So yeah, that's very sort of top of mind for me right now, especially also as we're sort of moving into this new year.
Sorry, go
can
on.
I just add, yeah, I was just going to add to that. As I was hearing and kind of hearing the flow of the conversation, something someone said earlier, that it's kind of this binary of you rest or you're working. So I really appreciate you saying that, like, but sometimes the ability to rest is that someone else is doing the work. I wanted to introduce into this conversation also in the context of complex adaptive systems and regeneration, that like not everything regenerates in that like it's coming back as it is. So especially in the context of rest and wintering, sometimes things actually like not everything that winters off is coming back in the spring. And so that introduces grief. And sometimes that's the resistance that people have to rest. Because if you come to a place of stillness, then all of a sudden, things that you weren't, things you didn't even anticipate, speaking for myself, things I didn't anticipate that were like things I needed to grieve are surfacing, because now I'm not distracting myself with busyness. But just also wanted to share that even in the context of the conversation and work and wintering, is that coming into the awareness that even as in nature, the regeneration is not necessarily that it's coming back as the thing that it is. It's actually composting into something, and a new thing is being born. But that new things cannot be born if we do not, in fact, take the space and the time to rest, which can be very challenging for me when I want to meet everything with activism. It's a humbling, I think, realization that I just wanted to introduce into the context, is that yes, work is a huge part of our lives, and we're talking about work, but just even as a human, cycles of rest and seasonality is important. And you had asked earlier around our local traditions and our lineages. I think our lineages understood that way better and way more than we do, that life has seasonality, there's roles for ages for a reason, and this kind of, I get into eldering. And I think that the more we remind ourselves and remember pre-industrialization and pre-this, and more of the ebb and flow of the totality of our being, the better off we will be. Certainly my mental health has improved by being in nature and watching oceans, definitely the trees. I did not know there was a word for it, so thank you. I just Googled forest bathing and Shinrin-yoku. But just wanted to introduce that, like, with rest comes the grief, comes the letting go, comes the, because sometimes my tendency is to think regeneration is that, and then I will come back and be the hero again.
100%. And thank you so much for spelling that out. I really like that, when we're talking about, the things dying off, or the fallow season, and then what comes back won't be the same. It could be a different iteration of that, or a better iteration of that. It doesn't even have to be better or good or bad, or, to make it binary, but just those kind of the seasons of that, I guess. So just thanks for spelling that out. I really appreciate it. I know I had two other questions for both Louise and Remy, but I'm also just very conscious of time, and we've loads of questions from our participants. So I want to give them space to ask questions before we jump into a lovely grounding meditation from your good self, Remy. So is everybody okay if we park any outstanding questions that we have as a panel, and we just open things up to our participants, if that's okay? You can give me the thumbs up if that's the case. There's been a ton of questions coming in, so just bear with me while I organize myself in the background and do some Zoom wizardry. I just wanted to make sure that I kind of honor them and capture them correctly. If my computer will cooperate with me for just 2 seconds. What did I want to do? Right. While we are looking at some of these questions, I wanted to also give everybody the space to reflect. So not everyone will want to ask a question. Not everyone will want to come off mute. So we have some provocations that we'll share in the chat. And you can reflect personally, individually. You can journal, you can add your comments to the chat. We talked about doing small breakouts or larger breakouts, but I think that we're an intimate group, so we're going to keep things just in conversation here. But I just wanted to give you time to think about how you would like to reflect. So with some of the questions that we have coming up, you can pop your thoughts in the chat, write your own notes, have a think about what works best for you. So just give me 2 seconds there, and I will grab our questions. So we have a ton of questions coming in. It's a very engaging topic. Give me a minute there now. So some of the questions, actually, Remy or Tony, you probably already put them in the chat, have you? So what are some of this is something that's worth thinking about as I pull some of the questions from the thread that's been going around. So what are some of the intangible actions of care that people have experienced in the last couple of years that they would like to share? And what communities or spaces have you been in that have felt nourishing for you? and what factors or things about them felt that way and what made them feel nourishing for you. And what ways have you found support and found ways to support and protect rest in your life? So have a noodle over those while we grab our questions from everybody. And feel free to pop your reflections in the chat. So oh yeah.
I think I can take the one of ways that I've found to support and protect rest is I've been very mindful that it doesn't need to be this really big thing, which then makes it inaccessible and insurmountable. It is being intentional and purposeful, even in the moment. I like what Zandrea said earlier about a cup of tea. How I prepare that cup of tea, not just, waiting for it to cool down, putting a nice block in it and chugging it, but like understanding that I might not have many other moments in the day, but like this moment with this cup of tea. I have been participating in this amazing course, We Will Dance with Mountains, and there's a really great teacher there whose name I'm blanking on, but she invites you that when you're interacting with something to connect with it. So in the context of a cup of tea, she would be like, reflect on whose hands made this cup? Where did you buy it? What was the value chain? What do you want to, what is your body telling you about that? What is coming into your mind about that? And just, I guess, not allowing the transactionality to be my story. Probably can't do it all day, but in the context of a cup of tea, being expansive about that has been a very rejuvenating and empowering and supportive way for me to support and protect my rest that doesn't bring all these narratives of all the ways that I can't do it. I just wanted to give kind of just that very practical example of how, and then those like tiny moments of doing that with myself is actually depositing seeds of wellness, for lack of a better way to say it.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And I know that we had a couple of questions, and apologies while I was like trying to figure out where they were and multitasking like a loon in the background here. I know that Emma, you had a question which we kind of touched on a bit in the chat, but I was wondering if you wanted to come off mute and ask it. It was around setting boundaries and being involved in the voluntary nonprofit sector, which is, as you said, a hobby, but you also find it hard to switch off from. So I was wondering if you wanted to share that.
I'm happy to. My question was, how can you set boundaries and also get better at decompartmentalizing some of the like nonprofit and charity work you do, because it's something I find incredibly fulfilling. But also wanting to get better means that sometimes it comes at the expense of other things. So my question was kind of on the kind of idea of boundary setting.
I have, as someone who's worked in the nonprofit sector for 15 plus years, I have a lot to say on this, but I'm going to pass to our panel to see if anyone wants to pick up the thread on boundary setting, voluntary work, and yeah, any thoughts on that one?
I can make a little bit of a start. So whilst I work in, I get paid for some of the work that I do, certainly around systems. I have a particular model that I apply for myself, which is if I am able to charge not as much as other people would do necessarily, certain parts, I then ensure that I counteract that with giving back. So I also, where I coach, example, I provide coaching to community leads for free or for a nominal cost. And so I've created a degree of a boundary around that, again, around reciprocity. So as I'm working with the community that I'm a part of, I've really connected to the community centre there, and the work that they're doing things that are giving back to the community around social justice, which I really care about, as you might recall from the very beginning. So in supporting that leader, I can, by coaching, I can then create the kind of offer that person requires. We have a reciprocity where they are giving then back. They've got the skill set to then give back to the community, not myself, to the wider to the community, having those skills and making that real impact around that social justice area. So we work very much together around what my offer is and how that then contributes, and equally then also how that then contributes to myself in being able to maybe tell a story with regards to that. So and then I can promote that as a way of showing other areas about what might be able to happen. So for me, it's about how we share community and how I can give back in relation to that, but also then be able to be very clear and transparent how much I can actually give in that process. And I think honesty and truthfulness is a really good groundwork around that kind of compassionate kind of approach around boundaries. Further thing I'll just say about boundaries that I've really started to try to work with myself, because I must admit I'm not very good at saying no. If I'm really driven to something, I think it's really important, and I'm working with this, is that I have now created only very recently the bubble of a boundary, being a bit like what they call the 1970s lamps.
Oh yeah, the lava lamps.
Yeah, the lava lamps.
Yeah.
Yes. And I see now my boundary is like I'm standing in the middle of the lava lamp or the bubble. And then, so my boundaries are like this. And the most important thing is that it can flex and change, and that's fine, as long as it's not actually taking out my light, not exhausting me in a way that maybe, you know, it could otherwise do. So it's just feeling flexible, not rigid. And so that's just the imagery that I'm now creating for myself to try to hold those boundaries.
I love that. And that's like a big, that's going to be like one of the solid, like tangible takeaways for me of just how to visualize that boundary and those energies. So thanks so much for sharing that. I think we could talk about this for hours, but I'm very conscious that we've set aside some very precious time for some guided meditation from Remy, who's here with us today and who's going to talk us through that. So I think we're going to park questions for now, but we'll offer space in follow-up emails for how we can continue the conversation, because I think there's lots of stuff coming up from this. And so I'm more than happy to continue that. But I wanted to pass over to Remy and who will be able to kind of cue us up for the meditation and get everybody settled in and comfy, and then we'll come back at the end to just wrap everything up, say our goodbyes, and have a restful afternoon and evening. So over to you, Remy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Just so that we're not compressed in our practice and compressed leaving this, I'm going to condense the meditation just a bit, just so there's a gentle easing in, and then there's an easing out, and there's spaciousness afterwards for people to share or to continue whatever conversation people want to have. We've been sat here somewhat still, not me, I've been moving around a bit. So let's take a moment to just stretch a little bit. Some of you have turned your cameras off, which is great. Please feel free. Everyone else, I'll keep mine on just so you have an anchor. Let's just do some shoulder rolls, if that's available to you. Easing some of the tension that we might be feeling from this conversation and from having been sat for a long period of time. You can do some wrist rolls as well, if that feels available. Just move your body to the extent that that's available to you, appreciating that that might not be possible for everybody, but in whatever ways, even if it's just moving your eyes. And then whenever you feel ready, come to whatever stillness looks and feels like for you in this moment. It might not be a complete stillness. There is no right or wrong way to do this. And if you can see me, and if this is available to you, I feel very moved to offer a vagal nerve, sympathetic nerve practice. You take your right hand, put it under your left armpit, left hand on your right shoulder, sort of like an embrace. Bringing your attention, your awareness to your breath. And as I shared in the beginning, sometimes focusing on the breath can be activating. So really take care of yourself, because there's no right or wrong way to engage in the practice that we're doing together now. For those of you who are watching your breath, holding this posture, holding yourselves, let's take a few deep and cleansing breaths to arrive in this space we're creating together, in these moments of rest, connection, stepping out of time almost. Letting go with the exhale of any and everything that might be keeping you from being here with yourself in this moment and space out of time, in this moment of restfulness. Letting go with the exhale. Thoughts about what's going to come after our time together. Anything that's on our to-do list that feel like it's invading this precious moment. What feels unsaid, unresolved, just let it all go with the exhale. Now, if it's available to us, to the extent that it's not overly activating, the invitation is to continue breathing out, letting go with the exhale. All that has felt like not rest. All the ways that our attention, our time, our energy, our labor is pulled at and on. Symbolically, let it go with the exhale. Aches and pains we might be becoming aware of. Breathe them out. Tension in our body, in our minds, and in our hearts that we might be becoming aware of. Invite them to leave your being through the exhale. Trusting that this is a process and it might not happen immediately. Continue emptying out all that isn't serving you, all that is not you. Taking a few more of these clearing and cleansing and emptying breaths. maintaining this embrace, this calming, soothing embrace. Dropping your hands in your lap, placing them on your heart. Really honoring what feels most available to you, most nourishing and soothing. Allowing your inner guide, your higher self, to move you. Let's sit with this emptying for just another moment or two before we shift our focus. Now very gently, with care and mindfulness, let's pivot our focus from the emptying out to the drawing in. Dropping our focus into our heart space, imagining that it is our heart that is inhaling and exhaling. Heart space expanding as we're drawing precious breath in. A heart space becoming lighter with each exhale. With each breath, we drop more and more into the center of our hearts, the most powerful regenerative space in our energetic bodies. And as we drop more and more into that heart space, the invitation is to call back to ourselves, to our hearts, all the pieces of us, the aspects of us that have gotten lost out in the world. From all the expectations that have been put upon us, all the expectations we've put upon ourselves, all the ways we've been pulled out of ourselves, out of our nature, disconnected from our innate natural rhythms. Just imagine them like seeds coming back into the heart space, settling in the soil, in the garden of our hearts. Resting and rooting. And restoring us from within. Let's stay with this practice of pulling into the heart. All these different pieces of ourselves that may have gotten lost out in the world. Take a few more breaths here. We'll end as we began by taking a few of those deep and cleansing breaths, inhaling through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. And if it feels available, just before you disconnect and open your eyes, allow yourself to step inside an energetic bubble, a shield. This is your boundary. Whenever you feel pulled at, unanchored, untethered, allow yourself to step back into the shield. That's your sacred space. That's your protected space. And it can be your space of rest. I'm seeing you all encased in your own bubbles of energy and protection. And with that, we'll slowly bring this practice to a close. Sealing in all the work we've done together and the sacred time and container. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Remy. Well, that was delightful. Yeah, everyone is echoing that in the chat. I feel like I don't even want to talk. I want to just be quiet. So I'm going to just follow that instinct and just say that we will be in touch with everybody via email with all of the resources shared. And thank you to Alice, Remy, Zandrea, Louise. It was such a beautiful conversation and so important. I think everyone benefited from it. We'll be in touch. We'll share everything. We're not going anywhere. This is probably the first of many chats. And take good care of yourselves and have a restorative end of year break, and much love to everybody. Thank you all so much. Take care. Bye.